Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was sent to another realm by a goddess. To save an entire world from a madman, one goddess has given the Kages a means to send Naruto to another realm. Will Naruto be able to discover Kushina's divine identity, and can he survive the challenges of being her son? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 24. Chiron was sitting in his Professor X wheelchair, so named by Nathaniel Lloyd, who created it during his second summer at camp, at Yancey Academy, wondering how Grover did it. There was a generally understood and unspoken rule among keepers that Grover was violating, again. Keepers do not typically find half-bloods that are powerful enough to attract more problems than the keeper can ward off. Such things rarely happened, as in maybe once or twice a century. Sadly, when these incidents occurred, there was a high chance of the half-blood, the satyr, or even both individuals ending up dead. Talia's tree was the biggest reminder of such an incident that had stuck with the camp in its past 3 iterations. Percy Jackson's discovery by Grover was giving Chiron a massive headache. How was it that one of the kindest, but definitely most ill-equipped satyrs had managed to find 2 extremely powerful half-bloods within a decade of each other? If Chiron didn't know better, he'd almost bet that Taichi was carrying out a vendetta with the poor satyr over the fact that Grover's father and uncle stole her daughter's underwear during a panty raid as teenagers. At least Grover was able to call in backup, and there weren't any other half-bloods involved this time. That was something to be grateful about in his book. While Chiron was happy there was only one half-blood at Yancey, he was not happy about the confusion Percy was unintendedly putting him through with his bizarre scent. The reek of the extremely obnoxious mortal that surrounded Percy wasn't confusing at all for the old trainer. He hadn't seen the trick used in centuries by a mortal parent, but Chiron knew that Percy's mother was using another mortal to mask his half-blood scent from monsters. The centaur's sympathy did go out to Percy's mother, because whoever his mother was using to mask the boy's scent had to be an extremely nasty piece of work to get a reek that strong. The fact that such a strong smell was needed to mask Percy's extremely strong scent raised a mental alarm in Chiron's mind. It likely meant that one of his younger brothers had lost their self-control and given him a nephew to look after. Percy being a mixed-blood half-blood was a distant, although very much hoped for by Chiron, second possibility. Mixed-blood half-bloods were typically stronger than regular half-bloods due to being more god than mortal. Valerie Frizzle, the last such half-blood Chiron had trained, had the strength to rival a child of the Big Three. The only problem with that idea was that a half-blood, or a legacy, would not need to use a masking mortal odor to protect Percy. As troublesome as the strength of Percy's scent was, it was what was underneath the mortal reek hiding Percy's scent that really concerned Chiron. There was something off about Percy's scent in addition to his uncomfortably immense slumbering power. It wasn't the scent of a mixed-blood half-blood or the scent of monster ancestry. While rare, monsters did occasionally sire offspring with mortals. Foreign was probably the best word to describe what Chiron's experienced nose was sensing. Naruto had a faint hint of this scent, but that was to be expected living all those months a year on the edge of Olympus's control. Percy's foreign scent was much stronger and unexplainable, as the boy had apparently never left New York. The foreign scent reminded Chiron of the strange scent he had occasionally encountered during the closing decades of Camp Half-Blood 5, when he had to go to see some of his former students at the Imperial Palace of Constantinople. That scent had come from the strongest members of the Varangian Guard. How did Percy gain this addition to his scent? The current tension between Olympus and Atlantis only increased Chiron's concern over Percy. Grover hadn't noticed the signs because of his youth, but Chiron did see all of the signs. Percy was almost certainly related to an aquatic deity, and a powerful half-blood of that extraction would make things a lot more dangerous in an already tense situation. Thankfully, Hera wouldn't immediately assume that Percy was the thief like Zeus would if something of his was stolen. Judging from Percy's ignorance and personality, Chiron didn't think that Percy was connected to the theft at all. Hera would probably just insist that Percy swear a binding oath that he had nothing to do with the theft. That would probably be a spark that could ignite tension between Olympus and Atlantis. Even if the fates were smiling and Percy was not the son of Poseidon as Chiron secretly feared, Poseidon would move to put the boy under his protection and insist that no oath was necessary. Poseidon had been pissed at Hera ever since she started to insist that Amphitrite swear her innocence to having any part of the theft on the river Styx. Anything that caused Hera headaches was far game in Poseidon's book until Hera stopped insisted on the oath and apologized for doubting Amphitrite's word. The foreign aspect of Percy's scent might hold the only hope of keeping this standoff from turning into an all-out war. It was an extreme long shot, but there was a very faint possibility that whatever was giving Percy's scent that foreign undertone was masking his true demigod heritage and making it seem like the boy had an aquatic divine heritage. While such a possibility was almost impossible, the old trainer could still hold out hope until faced with irrefutable evidence. In any case, he still had a duty to protect Percy and see him safely to Camp Half-Blood. Naruto returned back to Alaska on the last day of his spring break. Artemis accompanied him on his trip from the hunter's camp riding the Ceryneian hind. They had spent most of the trip talking about their respective plans until summer. Naruto would be training himself and others while finishing off the school year. Artemis would be spending most of the time hunting predators that were encroaching on new ecosystems. When she got the opportunity, she'd also be putting down some members of the sex slave trade. Artemis wished that she could just wipe out every member of the trade, but that would be excessive intervention in mortal affairs. At least Hera had tripled Artemis's yearly limit of mortal filth to put down. When the duo reaches the edge of the town, Artemis stopped and Naruto quickly stopped as well. The goddess smiled at Naruto and said, "Thank you for spending time with me and my hunters this past week, Naruto. It was different, but very enjoyable." Naruto smiled in response and said, "It was great for me as well, Artemis. I'm really looking forward to trying out those 40k sets we got for our weekly game next time. Spending time with you and the hunters with my Kage Bunshins is alright, but I do prefer to spend time with my friends in person. Besides, I also like to see the progress the hunters have made. All that extra practice the hunters do during your hunting trips has left them at the top of the Ninshu lessons. Until next time, Artemis." Artemis watched as Naruto rode into town and then frowned when she saw Suna approaching on her motorcycle from the sky. The Greek goddess clenched her teeth together as she felt a burst of anger at Suna's approach. She hadn't even left the vicinity of the town, and that goddess was moving in to have her way with Naruto. The urge to go into town and punch the Norse goddess welled up inside of Artemis, and she was barely able to control it. If Artemis had experience with these emotions, she would have realized that she was feeling jealous of Suna. Just as Artemis was about to dismiss the Ceryneian hind so that she could teleport away, she felt a surge of divine power a few feet away from her. Artemis whirled around and saw a goddess appear covered in a cloak of falcon feathers with a massive boar the size of a Clydesdale standing by her side. Artemis shifted towards a defensive stance when she realized that this unknown goddess was another northern goddess. The goddess lowered the hood of her cloak to reveal long raven locks that were tied up so they were out of the way, but also easy to let them fall loose. She then held up her hands to show that she wasn't armed, and then spoke, "Be at peace, Artemis, daughter of Leto. I mean you no harm. In fact, I came to you today as a possible aid in your quest for my grandnephew's hand. I am Freya, the Norse goddess of love, sexuality, beauty, and fertility. I also have some minor aspects involving gold, magic, war, and death." Artemis frowned and said, "What does Aphrodite's counterpart?" Freya immediately cut Artemis off with a hiss. She then spoke in a hostile and dangerous tone. "Don't you ever compare me to that whore you call a love goddess. That filthy skank should be flayed and thrown into Nastrand with the rest of the accursed oath breakers. She wouldn't know true love or beauty if it hacked her with an axe." Freya's black eyes burned like lighted coals. Unconsciously, Artemis made her ride take a step back as she wearily looked at the enraged goddess. Freya was still hiding most of her power, but Artemis could sense that the Norse goddess at least rivaled her or Athena in power. Since the two virgin sisters were the strongest deities on Olympus outside of Hera or the big three, that meant that Freya was not someone she'd want to mess with. There was only one smart move to make in this situation, so Artemis swallowed her pride and said, "I'm sorry for offending you, Freya." That apology took almost all of the energy out of Freya's rage, and allowed her to quickly calm down. Freya bowed her head with a touch of pink on her cheeks from embarrassment. "I am sorry as well, Artemis, for forgetting that you do not know much about the North. My hostility towards that bitch Aphrodite is well known among those I interact with. My hostility towards your question was uncalled for given your circumstances." Freya sighed and said, "I suppose I should explain that outburst. I, like the rest of the Aesir, hold oaths and honor very highly. Aphrodite, with her outrageous number of affairs both with deities and with mortals, makes a mockery of her marriage oath, which is one of the most solemn oaths a person can give to another. She flitters here and there with her one-night stands and encourages people to focus on lust and sexuality instead focusing on love and beauty. To add insult to injury, she encourages people to focus on surface feelings instead of true feelings, and encourages affairs by saying that people should follow their hearts. The overt sexuality in current Western culture and the constant divorces that are plaguing the West at this time are the fault of her influence." A pained look appeared on Freya's face as she continued to speak. "Do you know how painful it is to have a harlot making a mockery of your position? To love is to give rather than to receive, to give in deeds and not in words, and to give of yourself and not in things. It also means to place someone else's happiness above your own to the point that you're willing to give up your own happiness so that they can be happy. Personally, I wish, Artemis, that you were the goddess of love for the West. While you are extremely ignorant about the romantic aspects of love, you have a great understanding of true love. The fact that you are willing and committed to sacrificing your most treasured possessions in order to protect those you love proves your understanding of true love." In all honesty, Artemis didn't know how she should take everything Freya had told her. On the one hand, she was happy that a powerful goddess she had just met was complimenting her. On the other hand, the idea of her being in charge of love felt like a slap in the face. Very quickly she decided that it was best to just accept the compliment and figure that Aphrodite was so horrible at her job in Freya's eyes that anyone would be a better replacement. To put the whole thing behind her, the Western goddess inquired, "Before we got off topic, you mentioned that you wanted to help me with your grandnephew?" The Norse goddess of love nodded her head and answered Artemis. "I am speaking, of course, about Naruto Uzumaki, who is, as you should know, is the grandson of my brother Freyr. You have done an admirable job with starting to gain his affections and possibly his love. However, you have not secured his love or his hand. There is still space for Aphrodite to arrange for someone else to become Naruto's wife or possibly his first wife. Before you can say anything, even oaths like the one Naruto gave you can be broken or negated." Artemis wasn't sure what frightened her more, the idea of Naruto having multiple wives or the idea of Naruto not marrying her. Although she did know that the source of her fear over Naruto not marrying her was not as clear-cut as it used to be. In a low voice she asked, "How can that happen?" Freya gave Artemis a hard look and said, "Love is an extremely complex emotion. It can withstand the hardest trials without a scratch, and it can also shatter in an instant into rage. The factor that determines which way love goes is honesty. One must be honest with themselves and with their partner, or a couple's love will not last no matter how much effort they put into it." Artemis blurted out, "I tell the truth." That outburst caused Freya to snort in derision. "Not all the time, and especially not where Naruto is concerned. I can see your attraction to Naruto plain as day, but you won't admit it out of your silly pride in the idea of staying unchanged. Newsflash, girl, people are changed by their relationships, and especially by romantic relationships. Their core selves and most of their habits remain unchanged unless a person truly wishes to change that, despite what some foolish people think. Nonetheless, a person's priorities and some of their habits will change when they are in a relationship. If you want to have a happy relationship with Naruto, you must first be honest with yourself. You must acknowledge your own feelings towards Naruto and accept them as part of yourself. This means accepting that things will be different for you than they were when you were single. Once you are honest and at peace with yourself, you can move on to being honest with Naruto. Being honest with yourself is pointless in sustaining a relationship if you are not honest with your partner. Now, I'm not saying be blunt about everything, but you shouldn't lie or hide the truth. The most prominent example of you failing to do this at the moment is not admitting to Naruto that you are not interested in getting out of your engagement. If you do not tell Naruto, I can promise you that Aphrodite will find out and use it to turn him against you. Freya then got on her boar and gave one final warning. Heed my advice or not at your own peril, Artemis. It is your life and the consequences of your decisions are yours to deal with. If you listen to my advice, I will be willing to help you further in the future. If you do not, I will not help you, and let you deal with Aphrodite's machinations against you and Naruto by yourself. As much as I don't want Aphrodite to win her bet with you, I will not help someone who will not help themselves. Freya then vanished in a flash of light, leaving a very confused and frightened Artemis behind. Life continued on as it always did for Naruto after his spring break with Artemis and the hunt. Every day after school, Naruto either having extra classes with Suna, studying under Skeletor, or spending time with Artemis. Saturday was Naruto's effective day of rest, spending most of the day after a quick workout with Arnold, Issei, and especially his mother. On Sunday, Naruto did independent training and prepared scrolls full of Kagebunshin for other half-bloods. The number of scrolls had increased since Naruto first started making them as Camp Half-Blood alumni started putting in orders for personal chakra training. Thanks to the alumni actually buying Naruto's scrolls, even though he would have offered them for free, he was making almost 100 drachma a month. Naruto was currently in Rosweiss' class, half-heartedly listening to her lecture. He was honestly trying to pay attention to the lecture, and Rosweiss was doing her best to make it interesting. However, it was just so boring to Naruto that he had to use most of his willpower to keep himself from zoning out like most of the class was doing. Then, just as Naruto was about to force himself again to focus on the lecture, he felt one of his Hiraishin kunai get used a vast distance away. Naruto every item with his Hiraishin seal formula sealed on his person at all times except for a few kunai that he had handed out for emergency purposes. Almost immediately, Naruto stood up while also manipulating the mist. He firmly looked Rosweiss in the eye and said, "I'm not feeling well at all, Mrs. Hayadu. I need to go see the nurse to make sure it's not something contagious." Rosweiss nodded her head and let Naruto leave the classroom, adding her power over the weave to his. Naruto hurried over to the classroom door and activated the Hiraishin jutsu as he touched the doorknob. The instant Naruto finished teleporting, he took a defensive posture and tried to take stock of his surroundings. He was outside of a half-destroyed fancy school building with hundreds of teens running around screaming their heads off. Naruto picked up his Hiraishin kunai and then locked his eyes on the massive three-headed dragon that was tearing up the school building. Very quickly Suna's lessons came rushing back to Naruto, and then he muttered, "What the Tartarus is Izme Gorenik doing this deep in the west?" Monsters typically stayed in the areas under the control of the Pantheon they traditionally opposed. Naruto wasn't sure why that was the case, and none of his teachers knew either. Interdomain monster migration patterns was not a priority issue for anyone who knew about the different domains to really research. The Zmays, and especially the Zmay Goroniks, were an exception to the general rule of thumb regarding monster habitats. Many Zmays had followed, or perhaps chased, the South Slavic tribes out of the north and into the west. A few Zemies had continued their hunt and settled in the west, typically in isolated areas far from Olympus or the regent's interests. What could have caused this dragon to suddenly attack in an area deep in the west? Naruto knew that he had to be deep in the west, as none of the people he gave a Hiraishin kunai to would venture near the edges of Olympus's control. Chiron suddenly crashed out of second-story window and unleashing a barrage of arrows at the Zmay while he soared through the air. The centaur landed next to Naruto and said, "Thank Olympus you came, Naruto. I've got a powerful half-blood of unknown lineage mixed up somewhere in all of these panicking mortals, and a massive dragon-like monster that I've never seen before that's suddenly shown up on a rampage." Naruto cut Chiron off and said, "That's Izme Gorenik, Chiron. Its scales are tougher than celestial bronze, and it is physically at least as strong as it looks. Cutting off one of its heads won't cause it to grow multiple new ones, but it can regenerate a head after a few hours. Besides their teeth, claws, and tails, Zmei Gorynyks naturally breathe fire. Judging by the slate-gray color of its scales, this Zmei is over a century old, which means it will have sentience along with access to storm-related magic. Seconds after Naruto said this, the center head of the Zmei roared into the sky, summoning lightning bolts. While pulling out an emergency bottle of Hydra blood, Chiron nodded his head carefully, listening to Naruto's explanation. Chiron was curious as to how Naruto knew all of this, but that could wait until another time. Chiron then called out, "Form several clones, Naruto, and have them create a barrier to protect the mortals. Grover will get the half-blood out of the school. You and I will focus on defeating this Zmei Gorynyk." The old centaur finished his orders by letting 3 arrows fly at once towards the Zmei's head. Unfortunately for Chiron, the 3 heads moved so that the deadly arrows harmlessly bounced the cold iron hard scales. A dozen clones instantly appeared behind Naruto, half scattered to form a barrier around the terrified mortals. The other clones joined Naruto in creating wind-style Rasengan cannons. They then quickly fired the Rasengans at the Zmei. The Zmei whipped its tail out and used it to shield itself from Naruto's attacks. Large clouds of smoke appeared where the 7 Rasengans hit the Zmei's tail. Naruto and Chiron quickly had dodged the Zmei's fiery counterattack, as 2 of its mouths let out jets of fire through the smoke. 2 of Naruto's clones were caught in the attack, but the other 4 were able to escape. 1 clone moved near Chiron while the rest quickly moved to provide cover for the clones on barrier duty. Naruto threw a knife with his Hiraishin formula at the Yancy school building and teleported to the half-collapsed roof. Immediately afterwards, Naruto unsealed his Kanabo with one hand and picked up his throwing knife with the other. He then blasted the Zmei with enough killing intent to get the attention of all 3 of the powerful creature's heads. As the Zmei whirled around, its razor-sharp claws effortlessly sliced through the concrete rubble in their way. The 3-headed dragon's tail cracked like a whip as it stared down at Naruto with contempt on its face. Seeing the hundreds of students cowering behind his clone's barriers made Naruto decided to take a gamble to try and end this fight without risking the mortals' lives. He bellowed out in Uargermanic, "Why are you attacking?" The Zmei froze in shock hearing the tongue of the north. Naruto motioned to Chiron with one of his Kage Bunshins to hold his next volley as he continued to speak to the Zmei. "What reason could have caused you venture so far from your cave? If you tell me, I can perhaps solve it without more destruction. No mortals have died yet, so this situation can still end without bloodshed, but this is the last chance we have before going to that abyss." The Zmei's heads almost seemed to be puzzled as it listened to Naruto's words. For a second Naruto thought that he might be able to convince the Zmei to leave. Older Zmei usually preferred to stay near their caves, so that they can protect their horde. Even with that hope, Naruto carefully observed the Zmei and noted the scales damaged by his Rasengans in case negotiations went south. Because he was observing the Zmei, he could see that all 6 eyes briefly glowed before it let out a defiant roar. Naruto jumped back and avoided a blast of fire while a grim look appeared on his face. Something was obviously controlling this Zmei, and Naruto couldn't sense a genjutsu on the creature for him to dispel. In a low, almost mournful tone, Naruto whispered in Uargermanic, "I'm sorry for what I'll have to do to you in order to protect the mortals caught in this situation." Naruto then created a Kage Bunshin that dispelled almost immediately after he created it in order to update all the other clones. Hera's son landed on the roof, and then jumped to another section of the roof. He then jumped onto the Zmei's tail and lifted his Kanabo above his head while shifting the Kanabo to his maximum weight. Once the Kanabo weighed 600,000 tons, Naruto guided its fall onto the base of the Zen'i's tail. Chiron watched in worry as Naruto caused Yancy's roof to collapse, pulling him and the Zen'i into the basement. Yancy might have been solidly built, but Chiron didn't know of any mortal building made that could withstand the equivalent impact of 3 of the largest fully laden cargo ships suddenly hitting the roof. The magical storm around the academy suddenly increased in its fury, echoing the muffled scream of the dragon in the basement. Chiron saw the Naruto clone near him pull out a Hiraishin knife and threw it at the floor. Naruto appeared where the clone's knife landed, painting from the strain of holding his Kanabo at its maximum weight. With luck, the pain from that attack will break the hold of whatever is forcing the Zenii to attack us. If not, we'll be lucky and it will quickly die from the trauma. It was a little surprising to Chiron that Naruto wanted to end the battle without killing the monster. He remembered what Naruto told the campers during the previous summer session about the importance of respecting life. However, Naruto's attitude was so different from the majority of heroes Chiron had trained that it still surprised him. Most half-bloods would want the glory of killing a dragon, with almost all the rest being concerned with surviving the monster attack. Taichi was apparently in a bitchy mood as the school rubble started to shake. Naruto looked at his clone and both of them nodded. Chiron, will get an opening in the Zenii's armor when it emerges. If you've got any more Hydra blood, I'd suggest you get it ready now. As Naruto was saying this, he and his clone each prepared a Rasengan. Chiron quickly pulled out his bottle of Hydra blood, had enough blood for one more arrow. The Narutos saw how empty the bottle was, decided to focus their attack on the Zenii's heart. All three of the Zenii's heads roared out in agonizing defiance as they burst through the school rubble. It was obvious to Naruto and Chiron that Naruto's attack and the resulting building collapse had done a number on the Zenii. The three-headed dragon's front paws were shaky as they emerged. One of its wings was folded in an unnatural angle, and both wings had gashes in the wing membranes. Apparently the Zenii's hind legs had taken out by the attack, as the dragon was only moving by pushing with its front legs. This was probably due to spinal damage caused by shockwaves from the attack. While physically crippled, the Zenii was not out of the fight yet, as it slowly tried to clear the rubble. The storm around the campus ramped up to hurricane levels, and the lightning strikes exponentially increased. Chiron and the Naruto clones were forced to constantly dodge the magically created lightning. The barriers around the mortals started to buckle from all of the lightning strikes, but they were thankfully able to hold. Naruto and his clones started to fire off wind-style Rasengan cannons, but the hurricane-like winds ruined the attack's accuracy. The only saving grace for Naruto was the fact that the Zenii was unable to move from the rubble thanks to its broken wing and paralyzed legs. When the first round of Rasengan cannons missed Naruto, and his clone prepared another round and fired them off. Chiron was thankful for having bratty younger siblings who threw around lighting whenever they threw a temper tantrum. Sure, the amount of lighting was more than Zeus usually used, but Chiron's age-old dodging skills could handle all of the lighting. As he dodged, the ageless centaur kept his eye on the Zenii, hoping to get a clear shot of an exposed section of the beast. Naruto and his clone kept on firing their attacks and breaking off small sections of the Zenii's armor. Finally, the moment Chiron had been waiting for arrived, and a clear shot appeared. He quickly took it, and his arrow flew true even in the winds. The arrow buried itself to the fletching in the Zenii. The storm quickly started to abate as the poison coursed through the Zenii. Then the storm suddenly disappeared, and the Zenii laid down on the rubble, wheezing in pain. A deep and agonized voice came from the three heads, speaking in a language that Chiron couldn't understand. "Aunts, come and listen to me. The force that drove me to attack this building has left me with my imminent death." Naruto fearlessly walked over towards the Zenii's heads, causing Chiron to worry about his nephew. Naruto gave the Zenii a slight bow and said, "What do you wish to say to me?" With its center head, the Zenii coughed and then said, "You tried to end this without bloodshed, and you apologized to me when you realized what you had to do in order to protect yours from my attack when I was under another's control. That respect deserves to be rewarded. Since I cannot tell you who controlled me, as I do not know myself, I will lead you what I can. Here is how you can find my cave." Chapter 25. Naruto quickly committed the Zenii's directions to its lair to memory as the great beast drew its last breath. The dragon's body remained behind, as northern monsters did not simply turn to dust when they died. In northern tradition, Naruto quickly sealed away the Zenii's body to be disposed of at the proper place and time. Usually, the residents of Asgard and their relatives on Earth would get one of the city's taxidermists to turn the beast into an appropriate decoration, or sometimes they would simply have the hide treated. Naruto planned to burn the Zenitsu's body, and then scatter its ashes near the dragon's cave. It had been forced to attack the school against its will, so the last thing Naruto wanted to do was put it on display like some mindless beast. Had the three-headed dragon attacked the school of its own free will, then Naruto wouldn't have minded making a memento to commemorate Chiron's and his deed. Once the Zenitsu was secured, Naruto proceeded to destroy all evidence in the rubble of the mystical nature of the battle. A fact that most half-bloods tended to forget about manipulating the mist is that the results were better when there was less hard evidence that the mist had to cover up. It also allowed you to shape what mortals saw in the mist more accurately. It didn't take Naruto too long to destroy the signs that the building was destroyed by a dragon. He then got out of the rubble and headed towards Chiron. Grover came out of his hiding spot dragging an unconscious Percy as Naruto reached Chiron. The satyr soon joined up with the other two and said, "Bah, is everything alright, Chiron? Naruto, you're here? I guess Chiron must have used the special knife you gave him." The nervously friendly look on Grover's face helped Chiron to calm his nerves slightly from the battle high. Chiron glanced at Naruto and then looked at Percy. There was no doubt in his mind that the dragon, which was from a species he had never even heard of before, had been after Percy. Best-case scenario was that he was simply powerful enough to attract the beast to him. Worst-case scenario was that someone sent the beast after Percy to enrage Poseidon by making it look like Zeus got rid of the boy, possibly on Hera's orders. Chiron knew his nephew Ares acted as a troubleshooter for Aphrodite roughly several times a century to get out of the doghouse. Zeus was well known to currently be on thin ice with Hera even after she forced him to just be a storm god in all but name. It wouldn't be irrational for someone to think that Zeus was taking a tried-and-true play from his son's playbook to get back in Hera's good graces. Chiron quickly made up his mind and said, "Our first priority is returning to Camp Half-Blood with Percy safely. Grover, I want you to procure us a working car from the faculty parking lot with a preference for a van." The old centaur paused as he saw Grover's face shift more towards nervousness. "You do remember how to hotwire a car, don't you, Grover?" Grover's ears got a touch of pink to them as he looked to the ground. Only cars made before the mid-90s. Both Naruto and Chiron stared at Grover in disappointment and a little disbelief. The nervous satyr let out a bleat and then got defensive. It's hard to remember the differences that car makers are putting into the ignition systems of the newer cars, and then there's the other anti-theft add-ons that have become standard in the past few years. Naruto shook his head and said, "I'll get us a car, Chiron." He then bounded off towards the faculty parking lot, wondering what the hell they were teaching seekers these days. Hotwiring a car was one of the first things Valerie Frizzle taught him how to do once he was big enough to reach all of the controls. Being able to steal and drive a car, even if one's driving was atrocious, was an imperative survival skill for a half-blood since it greatly increased one's mobility. Not that Naruto really needed to drive thanks to Bucephalus and his Hiratian seals. It didn't take Naruto long to pick out a van that was in drivable condition and hotwire it. He then drove it over to the trio and said while in the driver's seat, "One ride to Camp Half-Blood at your service." Chiron nodded his head and said, "Thank you, Naruto. Now if you don't mind, I will take care of the driving." "That's good, I'm not a good driver at all. I call shotgun though, just let me get out, and you can have the driver's seat." Naruto stopped talking as soon as the words left his mouth. Both he and Chiron looked at the driver's seat and then at the horse half of the centaur's body. Naruto then looked at the space that the driver's seat occupied and said, "Just give me a moment, Chiron." The demigod shinobi unbuckled and hopped out of the van. As soon as Naruto was out, he grabbed the driver's chair and ripped it out of the van. Then he tossed the chair over into the school rubble. That should have the added bonus of reinforcing the illusion the mist was projecting that school was hit by a car bomb. "Well," Cryon said with a little amusement, "that solves that problem." He then got into the van, sitting his hind legs where the seat used to be, and put his front hooves on the pedals. Naruto jumped over the van, landed at the passenger side door, and quickly made good his claim to the shotgun seat. Grover had to drag Percy over to the van, put the unconscious boy in a seat, buckle his friend up, and then get into his own seat. As soon as everyone was buckled up, Chiron put the pedal to the metal and drove off towards Camp Half-Blood. Self-reflection was perhaps the hardest art that a deity could try to perform. The art was hard enough for mortals to perform on themselves, but even the most pig-headed mortal could examine themselves and their actions far better than any deity could. Mortals could look at the world and realize there were things outside of their control. That realization created a seed of humility, which could allow them realize their faults and strive to correct them. Mortality itself also helped mortals realize their faults, as it drove many of them to think about what they did in life, and how that life would be remembered. On the other hand, deities were generally prideful, shallow, and creatures of the moment. Almost every deity could dream of ascending in power over other deities. Immortality dulled life's lessons, as deities could outlive the consequences of their mistakes. Thanks to their curse of death at the end of every Ragnarok, the Aesir got to experience mortality and all of the benefits it brought them. The lessons they learn in each lifetime tended to dull a bit over, but each cycle saw improvements in the Aesir's actions. It drove them to try and become the kind of gods mortals wanted to rule over them. Not that the Aesir, or even the deities in general, who remembered the Abyss War, had been cruel or uncaring towards mortals. It's just that it was generally hard for them to feel much for the current race of man when comparing it to the first race. A deity's power also tended to make it hard for them to feel sympathy and compassion for others. Artemis did not know about these facts when she set out to think about Freya's conversation that the Norse goddess had had with her almost a month ago. However, she was quickly learning why the Eastern pantheon had labeled humanity as the best of existences on Earth. It had taken her this long just to be able to start really looking over her actions. The fact that Artemis was able to do so this fast was remarkable, and had only happened because of the hunters. Spending time with and being responsible for the hunters gave her practice in looking beyond her immediate wants and desires. Looking back on her actions, the goddess couldn't help being annoyed at her actions after she found out about Naruto's existence. She had the right to be upset over finding out that her multi-millennia-long lifestyle was about to end. It was understandable that she was worried over what being married might mean for her. Especially when one considered the fact that a few men she had previously let get close to her had tried to rape her. Thankfully, those men had been quite rare among the number male acquaintances and friends she had over the ages, even if they tended to predominate the myths that mortals had passed on. Part of her was still annoyed that Homer ignored her friendship with Hector and his wife, even if it was done to keep mortals from thinking that Hector's deeds had been achieved through divine favor. However, her behavior in the weeks and months following her learning about Naruto was not acceptable, even if Artemis still didn't want to admit it out loud. She was barely able to break her pride enough to admit to herself that there was a problem with her actions back then. Inner turmoil or not, there was no excuse for being practically paralyzed for months because of her fear. As the leader of the hunt, it was her responsibility to look after all of her hunters, and she had effectively abandoned them during that period. Thankfully, Zoe had been able to pick up the slack like a good lieutenant. Most of the goddess's interactions with Naruto left her feeling uneasy, uncertain, anxious, often happy, and sometimes even elated when she reflected on them. The reason why Artemis had these feelings eluded her. She still had a long way to go before her meditation efforts could get past the stubbornness and pride she had inherited from her father. What Artemis did realize at the moment from her meditations is that she usually enjoyed Naruto's presence, and that she enjoyed it more than she usually enjoyed her occasional male acquaintances. The fact that she had found herself enjoying Naruto's company was an unexpected bonus from the fates in Artemis's mind. As Artemis continued her meditation, her thoughts drifted to the night when Naruto suddenly left her hunter's camp. She remembered every detail of that night, from the point she spotted Naruto until she got him back to her camp and placed in a bed that she summoned in her greeting chamber of her tent. The one thing among all the memories that was completely clear and apparent to Artemis. She had teleported on instinct to catch Naruto. Why had she caught him without even thinking about it? Not that Artemis wanted Naruto to die. In fact, the thought of him dying made her sick to her stomach. What was bugging Artemis was the fact that she simply reacted to save Naruto. Shouldn't she have at least thought about it for a split second before she saved him? After all, that was a golden opportunity for her to win her bet with Aphrodite, as she was only bound to marry Hera's first half-blood son. Under the terms of the oath, Artemis couldn't harm Naruto, or arrange to put him into a deadly situation. At the same time, she didn't have to actively save Naruto if he ended up in a dangerous situation outside of her domain. Even if a dangerous event happened to Naruto, while he was in her domain, she only had to give him the standard chance that any half-blood had to keep with her oath. If Naruto had fallen to his death, as he almost certainly would have, that night would have freed Artemis from the oath. Shouldn't she have at least stopped to think about that option? Part of Artemis wanted to dismiss these thoughts. Thanks to Hera, she knew that the fates had put her virginity on the auction block. Getting married was not on Artemis's list of 100,000 things she'd like to do, but losing her virginity to a husband was infinitely more preferable for the goddess of maidens than the alternatives. Her honor demanded that the man who betted her demonstrate responsibility for his actions and marry her if he was a boyfriend, as mortals dubbed courting these days. Her self-respect made the idea of a one-night stand abhorrent. The last possibility was something that she feared in her nightmares, like any women did when that topic came up. Artemis's stubbornness wanted to claim that she remembered this fact that night, and that she simply moved to protect Naruto, because she would have an extremely hard time finding another guy who was halfway acceptable as a husband. Another part of Artemis realized what was happening to her, but the goddess wouldn't allow herself to voice the fact that she was too afraid to admit even in her head. That part of Artemis was the part that monitored her hunters when one of them was in danger of possibly breaking their oath. Despite some popular rumors among the mythological inclined, Artemis did not kick a hunter out if they started to develop feelings for someone. Such things were very rare, but not entirely unavoidable with the hunter's nomadic lifestyle. Not even her hunters could control their hearts and completely block out Aphrodite and Eros's influence. Artemis only expelled a hunter if they acted on such feelings, since it was by acting that they broke their oath to her. If she noted a hunter who was starting to have feelings for someone, she'd help the hunter through the issue. Not that anyone outside the hunt realized that, since people only talked about the rare fallen hunters in myths and gossip. Percy was shaken awake when the van hit a speed bump. He blinked his eyes in confusion as the last thing he remembered was the school building shaking, and then a ceiling tile falling towards him. Percy quickly spotted his pal Grover sitting in the seat next to him, and he blurted out, "What's going on, Grover?" Grover bleated out in surprise and then turned to look at his friend. "You're awake, Percy. I thought with that hit to the head that you'd be out for a few more hours." With a confused look on his face, Percy asked, "What happened, Grover, and where are we?" None of this was making any sense to the clueless half-blood. The still-disguised satyr chuckled nervously and said, "Well, you see, Percy, there was an incident at school about 2 hours ago and everyone had to be sent home." Naruto turned around in his chair so that Percy could see his head and cut in. "Grover, stop trying to hide what really happened. The proverbial house has already fallen, so it's time Dorothy here realizes that Kansas is long gone." Naruto paused for a second and focused his attention on Percy. "Hello, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, your most likely cousin, and the backup Chiron called in when your school was attacked by a dragon." Percy's eyes bulged in shock when he heard Naruto say that. "What? How could the school be attacked by a dragon? They aren't." The younger demigod was cut off by a glare from Naruto. The older demigod quickly started to explain things to Percy. "Yes, dragons are real. Regular mortals only know about them in myths because dragons, along with everything else that can be regarded as mythical, are typically hidden from their sight. That monster that attacked you on that school trip of yours was an example of how mythological things typically hide among mortals." Naruto paused to give a heated glare to Chiron. Hera's son loved and greatly respected his uncle. The ageless centaur had ensured that the vast majority of half-bloods survived and lived full lives. However, Naruto wanted to know what the Tartarus he was thinking leaving Percy and Yancy after the monster attack at the museum. Basic Protection Detail 101 Lesson 1 stated that if the principal is attacked, you get the principal to a safe location. Chiron at least had the decency to look embarrassed as his nephew glared at him. Given the dragon attack, Chiron had to admit that he had been a little careless in watching over Percy's safety after the Fury attack. In his defense, keeping a half-blood sent weak while educating them about the basics of the mythological world was a sound tactic that had worked very well in the past. Chiron also knew that he was one of the best fighters one could find outside of gods, and he was very knowledgeable about almost every beast that would want to attack a half-blood. Most low-level monsters tended to avoid being in the same area. He was deeming it too much trouble to go after a half-blood under his protection. How was he to know that Taichi would throw him a curveball in the form of that Zemi? Percy followed Naruto's glare, and his eyes bulged out in shock when he saw a centaur driving the van. His shock only increased when he got a look at the centaur's face and blurted out, "Mr. Brunner?" Naruto shot his uncle an amused grin and said, "Interesting cover name, Chiron." He then turned back to look at Percy and said, "Yes, we are in a car being driven by a centaur. The only fact about this that is of any real importance is that it is proof you have left that nice cozy box you called reality behind and have entered Wonderland. Now focus on me and what I have to tell you because it is very important for your future safety. The gods and monsters that Chiron was teaching you about all year in school are real. Like me, you are lucky or unlucky enough to be a half-blood, a being that in older times was more popularly known as a demigod. Don't bother trying to deny it, Percy. Everyone who knows about the mythical side of the world can figure out what you are. ADHD and dyslexia together are a strong sign to those in the know. Mystical creatures, especially the hostile ones typically called monsters, can smell your non-human half. Others like myself who have a gift for sensing the world around us can pick up the divine tint in your presence which signifies your mixed blood. Denying the truth or pretending that this is all some weird dream does you no good and will actually hurt you. The sooner you accept this, the sooner you can get over it and start preparing to live the rest of your life. Chiron coughed and then spoke up, "Naruto, I think you're being a little too forceful in your approach in explaining things to Percy. We are talking about a fundamental change in how young Mr. Jackson understands and views the world. Such a paradigm change is inherently very stressful and confusing. It's even more so when one considers the exact nature that forced this early revelation before he could be properly prepared." Naruto rolled his eyes and replied, "If Dorothy here needs to have his mental circuit breakers reset once I'm done giving him the 411, I'll just throw him into the lake at camp to wake him back up. As someone who has gone through several earth-shattering paradigm changes, I can tell you that the slow and gentle approach does not work very well. It's better to quickly go about it like ripping off a band-aid. Besides, what other choice do you have but to tell him everything now since he's dragon bait? Are you going to keep him locked up in the big house for the next month and introduce him one by one to every nymph, satyr, half-blood, and harpy in camp?" A small smirk appeared on Naruto's face when he saw Chiron blush slightly. Percy reached his breaking point and started to unbuckle his seatbelt. He wanted out of this crazy van and back to sanity. Even dealing with Smelly Gabe was preferable at the moment for Percy than dealing with this insanity. At least with Smelly Gabe, Percy knew when to hide and how to roll with the punches. Perhaps if he was really lucky, Percy tried to rationalize to himself, he would wake up and realize that this was just a dream. Just as Percy was about to completely undo his seatbelt, Naruto sprang into action. Naruto shoved his cousin back into his seat, redid Percy's seatbelt, and then pulled out a pocket knife. Before Grover or Chiron could even register what Naruto had done, the older half-blood used his pocket knife on Percy to create a shallow cut that barely drew blood. Naruto quickly closed up his pocket knife and wanted to shake his head at Percy, wincing and grabbing his arm. How could such a small and shallow cut bother the boy? There was barely any blood coming from the cut. Tartarus, Naruto had gotten worse cuts from underbrush when going through wooded areas. Naruto glared at Percy and firmly said, "As that little cut I just gave you proves this is all real. If you want to live beyond your next birthday, it is imperative that you listen to what I have to say and accept it. You don't have to like it. Tartarus, there are many facts about the real world that people hate when they learn about them, but whether or not you like something doesn't change the fact that it exists. You are a half-blood like me. Your father is a god, although we do not know who he is at the moment. Because of your divine blood you will have access to abilities that mortals do not. However, you will also have to be on your guard against monster attacks. All of the monsters Chiron covered this year with you exist for real, and they constantly reform themselves. Sadly, monsters and half-bloods have been feuding for millennia. Monsters attack us partly in revenge for our older siblings killing them in the past and partly as preemptive strike against half-bloods trying to kill them for a quest. A dragon attacked Yancy, apparently homing in on your half-blood scent. Because of this, you're being taken back to Camp Half-Blood now for survival training instead of waiting a few months until the summer session starts. While I cannot say this for sure, you're probably going to have to pass some sort of competency test before anyone will let you out of Camp Half-Blood. If we didn't, then we might as well kill you ourselves. At least then you die less painfully than from a monster attack. There are monsters that can swallow you in one bite. As a person who has been swallowed by and escaped from a giant snake, I can testify that you really don't want to die in that manner. The van stopped at a stoplight, allowing Chiron to pull out a small water bottle that the van's owner had set in the door, and hand it to Percy. He then spoke up and said, "While I find Naruto's words to be heavy-handed, Percy, you should understand where he is coming from. Even a regular trained half-blood has to be on guard most of the time to protect themselves. For someone like you who is currently untrained, and who unfortunately has a very strong scent, the risk of being attacked is much worse. Why don't you have some water and enjoy the ride to camp for the time being? I promise that we will ensure that you have everything you need to be safe soon enough." Percy hesitantly accepted the water from Chiron and looked down at his feet. The van jolted into motion as soon as the light turned green, splashing a little bit of water onto Percy's arm. Chiron observed the splash out of the corner of his eye using the rearview mirror. His eyes narrowed when he saw the small cut on Percy's arm disappear. As he feared, the water had healed Percy when it spilled slightly as he intended it to do. Only one godly lineage could bestow that kind of healing with just a few drops of water. Unfortunately, that meant that Percy's presence signaled bad or worse events coming on the horizon at camp, depending on his place in that lineage. Gabe Ugliano was in an extremely foul mood and had been hitting the booze early today. That was never a good combo, as Sally Jackson had learned over the years. She had unfortunately been married to Gabe. Many stuck with an abusive husband would think that was either somehow all their fault, or they would be praying for him to change back into the man they knew he once was again. Sally just stoically endured Gabe's tempers, and did her best to avoid his attention when he wasn't in a semi-civil mood. She had been well aware that Gabe was poor excuse of a man when she met him, and accepted putting up with him in order to spend more time with Percy in relative safety. She never prayed about her marriage or about Gabe in general, as she was worried about attracting Hera's attention. The myths were quiet on Hera's attitudes towards her other siblings' illegitimate children outside of her opinion of her husband's infidelities. Still, Sally figured that it would be better to cautious and not risk a goddess's wrath. Suddenly, the TV show Gabe was watching was cut off as an emergency news broadcast was put on. The announcer on TV bowed his head and said, "Sorry for interrupting your regular broadcast. However, it is my duty to inform you all that there has been a terrorist attack that has recently occurred here in New York State. This is the second major terrorist attack against the United States this decade." A picture of the smoking rubble of Yancy Academy appeared on the TV next to the news anchorman. Just over an hour ago, the prestigious private boarding school Yancy Academy was destroyed by a series of car bombs. Preliminary investigators have not been able to determine more than that from the attack yet. Unfortunately, 13 children and teachers at the academy have been killed in the attack, and over 4 dozen more have been rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Names dash. The announcer's statement was cut off by Gabe changing the channel to try and find a sports game to watch. Seriously, who cares if a bunch of snobbish little shits were dead? Sally shocked Gabe by grabbing for the remote and trying to turn the channel back to the news. Percy went to Yancy and she needed to know how he was doing. Gabe saw red and punched Sally in the face, knocking her down on the floor. He got out of his chair and roared with his fist ready for another strike. "Shut up, you stupid bitch. I'm the man of the house." Gabe was cut off from saying more by a kunai that sailed through the nearby window and embedded itself in his chest, piercing his heart. Gabe collapsed like a sack of potatoes, and Naruto teleported into the room onto the pig's chest just after the swine hit the floor. Sally watched in shock as Naruto took $2 coins out of his wallet, opened Gabe's mouth, and placed the coins in the dead man's mouth. Naruto quickly closed Gabe's mouth and said, "Sharon, please accept this payment to carry this man's shade swiftly across the river so that he might be judged for his actions in life." Naruto knew that he'd later regret taking Gabe's life, although he didn't feel anything but disgust for the man at the moment. Culturally, the elemental nations took a very dim view on spousal abuse, and that was magnified in the shinobi villages. While wives were traditionally subordinate to their husbands among the nobility, husbands were expected to care for and protect their wives. To mistreat, let alone abuse, one's wife was a massive dishonor that stained a man's personal honor and the honor of his entire clan. Among the shinobi, honor wasn't nearly as stressed, but they also worried about clan honor. The dim view of spousal abuse was magnified among shinobi because of the expectation that one's spouse would help them and protect their family while they were away. The fact that any kunoichi could permanently remove those who went against social conventions kept any would-be deviants strictly in line. As Hera's son, Naruto had an especial distaste for spousal abuse. With Gabe dead, Naruto quickly sheathed his kunai, and then held both hands out in front of him so that Sally could see his empty hands. Thank Taichi, he had noticed the compasses reacting to Percy's blood when he went to clean his pocket knife. Naruto had gotten Sally's residence from Chiron, saying that he wanted to double-check to make sure she was safe from any monsters noticing Percy's lingering scent. In the back of Naruto's mind, he wondered why his compass didn't react to Percy's presence nearly as well as it did to Sally's, which it reacted to as designed. Perhaps the ichthyer in the boy's blood was masking the Selkie blood? That was something for him to think about in the future. "Don't worry, Mrs. Jackson. I'm a half-blood and I'm here to help you." Naruto paused for a moment and then added, "Don't worry about your son. We got Percy out Yancey during the attack and have safely gotten him to Camp Half-Blood." Sally frowned as she looked at the unknown to her half-blood. She was shocked how he had appeared after killing Gabe. Not that she was particularly upset at Gabe's demise. The man's only good quality was that his scent was able to protect her son for all these years. She had seen drug dealers and gang leaders around the neighborhood who were better men than Gabe, and those were some pretty nasty individuals. Sally looked up at Naruto and asked with just a hint of nervousness, "Who are you and why are you here?" Naruto gave her his usual friendly smile as he got off of Gabe's corpse. Personal opinions of the man aside, Naruto was not about to disrespect a dead man in any way if he could avoid it. He calmly said, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Officially, I'm here to check on your safety. A dragon recently attacked Yancey, apparently drawn in by your son's half-blood scent. I and several others wanted to check on you to make sure that you were safe from any monster attacks as well. Unofficially, I'm here to fulfill a quest given to me by your great-grandfather Connor MacLeod to ensure your safety. Your son isn't the only one to have a mythically inclined family tree." Chapter 26. Percy was still trying to wrap his head around everything Naruto had told him during his impromptu lecture on the way to Camp Half-Blood. Seeing Naruto disappear in a flash of light only reinforced to Percy just how strange things were now. If that wasn't enough to hammer into Percy's head that his previous view of the world was long gone, Gover provided another example by taking off his shoes to reveal goat hooves, reinforcing his claim to be a satyr. At least Percy was able to remain calm as he got out of the van and got his first look at the big house. The house itself didn't stand out as something you'd expect to see for a hidden mythical training camp. While Percy was taking in the sights, Chiron got out of the van and walked over to Percy. He then put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "I know that you're overwhelmed by everything you've learned today. Gods know that I was hoping to ease you into our world, but unfortunately that wasn't in the fate's plan for you. Don't worry about your mother, as I'm sure she will be fine. Naruto was just concerned for her safety since neither of us expected a dragon to hone in on your scent. He was raised as an orphan since his father died the day he was born, and his extended mortal family was sadly wiped out in a war. Because of this, he is very protective of campers and their families. Even if something were to go after your mother, I know that Naruto will be able to handle the problem. That bit of news made Percy feel better. A small part of him was starting to worry about his mom's safety. Smelly Gabe not so much. Percy was pretty sure he wouldn't be too upset if a monster turned his stepfather into a stone statue. Suddenly a question popped into Percy's head and he blurted out, "How did Naruto just disappear like that? Is it a special half-blood ability that's taught here?" Chiron chuckled, glad to see that Percy was starting to ask questions. He had been a bit sad that Percy was not the most attentive student back at Yancy. But to be fair, the mortal educational system wasn't really tailored to help half-blood learn given their special needs. With a little bit of luck, Percy would keep asking questions and become a more attentive student. But until then, Chiron had a curious student to teach. Naruto's a unique half-blood in that he actually comes from another version of Earth and was brought over here by his mother for his safety. Over there, people are apparently closer to the mystical side of the world and developed abilities that seem almost magical that are collectively known as Ninshu. Naruto's people are also apparently less technologically advanced than mortals here are, so it all balances out. Ninshu has several different areas of study, but all of them are made up of techniques known as jutsu. You'll learn more about Ninshu and its disciplines as part of your education at camp. Naruto and his mother discovered that half-bloods and most woodland spirits like nymphs and satyrs can use the Ninshu arts since they also have the special energy that the regular mortals in Naruto's world possessed. He disappeared, as you put, by using a high-level jutsu that lets him teleport to places he's previously marked. His mortal father was also famous in Naruto's homelands for using the jutsu. Percy blinked his eyes in shock. Normally, he would have thought that people from alternate Earths was something straight out of a comic book and couldn't happen in real life. Fortunately for Percy, his sense of reality was currently sitting in a corner of his mind, crying its eyes out, allowing him to accept what he was being told. And he had seen the older teen disappear in a flash, so Chiron's explanation wasn't that hard to swallow given the former impossibility Naruto demonstrated. Percy's ADHD mind then locked onto one fact Chiron had told him: Naruto's mortal father? You mean his mother's a goddess? Chiron let out a slightly nervous chuckle and replied, Naruto's divine parent is his mother, and a rather surprising one at that, given that we all widely thought that she'd never have a half-blood child. A friendly bit of advice for you, Percy: don't be indefinitely, don't act surprised that there are half-bloods with divine mothers. I know that almost all of the famous half-bloods known to mortals except for Achilles had divine fathers, so it is a somewhat understandable error to make. However, that tends to be a sore spot for most of the goddess's children, and mentioning it is a good way to get on their bad side. After saying that warning, Chiron became a lot more chipper as he continued to speak. Now then, Percy, we need to introduce you to Mr. D, who the camp director here at Camp Half-Blood. Mr. D is the god of wine, so please be respectful of him. Also, don't refer to him by his true name unless you are being very respectful about it. After you've been introduced, I'll find one of the more experienced campers to show you around, and so they can answer some of the questions that are no doubt on your mind. While this is going on, I will be filing some paperwork to get you transferred from Yancy Academy to Heron's School of Classical Inquiry. That is the private school the camp runs for the year-rounder members, who you will be joining at least until the end of the summer term. While Percy was being introduced to Mr. D, his mother was getting a mythological crash course of her own from Naruto. Sally started to rub her temples as she sat down at the kitchen table. Gabe's corpse had been sealed away in a scroll by Naruto, who would make it look like he had been stabbed during a robbery that had gone bad. Thanks to the mist, only another half-blood would be able to discover the altered evidence concerning Gabe's demise. Not that they could do anything about it, as a hidden federal law that FDR slipped into the New Deal stated that half-bloods in law enforcement always had to use the evidence available to their regular mortal counterparts. Sally stopped rubbing her temples and looked at Naruto. She then said, "So let me double-check to make sure I understand everything you're telling me. In addition to the Greek gods that Perseus' father belongs to, there are other pantheons across the world with other spirits who follow the gods of those pantheons. My great-grandfather was a Selkie, a seal spirit which is somewhat similar to sea nymph in terms of power and abilities in the Norse pantheon." There was a pause as Naruto unsealed his records of Connor MacLeod's family tree, which ended with Sally's mother, who was the youngest of Connor's granddaughters. It wasn't really needed since Naruto had explained the blood tracking seal to her earlier, but the extra evidence was nice to see. In a calm manner that only a mortal mother of a half-blood could possess when it came to the bazaar, Sally continued. "So my great-grandfather heard that I'm going to be in great danger, and he gave you his own pelt to give to me? What would happen if I accepted this pelt?" Naruto pulled out some more sealed notes and quickly looked up the answer to Sally's question. "Okay, Mrs. Jackson, from what I've been told, the magic in the pelt will unlock your dormant Selkie blood and strengthen it. If it was just a regular Selkie pelt, it would strengthen your Selkie blood until it became roughly half of your genetic makeup. Since the pelt came from a blood relative of yours and said relative deliberately gave up his pelt for you, the blood strengthening effects are supposed to be even stronger. No one can say for sure, but your genetic profile should shift to anywhere between February 3rd and 3/4 Selkie, with an extremely small chance of you becoming a pure Selkie. With the unlocked Selkie blood, you will have far greater healing, strength, reflexes, and resistance to monster attacks than as a human. Having Selkie blood will also allow you transform into a seal at will, a natural affinity for swordsmanship, and longer youth. The only downsides to this are that you will technically be under Asgard's jurisdiction, and if you become a pure Selkie, you'll need to submerge yourself for an hour each day in at least brackish, preferably salt water. Pure Selkies will weaken if they aren't submerged in brackish or salt water every day, and will die if they go without being submerged in those kinds of water for 3 days. The abilities that Naruto mentioned to Sally were rather tempting to her, as they would help her protect Percy. For years she had feared what would happen if all her attempts to hide her son failed. As a last resort, she supposed that she could have prayed to Poseidon for aid if Percy was attacked. However, she was worried about the trouble such an action would cause Percy by bringing his existence to the other gods' attention. Sally had always prided herself on handling her problems on her own, so the offer of the strength to protect her son was more tempting than Poseidon's offer to build her a castle under the sea. Besides, Naruto's offer that her great-grandfather had set up for her didn't seem insulting to Amphitrite in Sally's opinion. The Queen of the Ocean might be more tolerant of her husband's indiscretions than her sister-in-law, but Sally wasn't about to use up more of Amphitrite's goodwill than her heart had already caused her to use if she could avoid it. Yet another reason why Sally had deliberately avoided praying to Poseidon if she could. Still, Sally knew her Greek mystical history well enough to know that power and mystical gifts almost always had a price attached to them. May the hospitable one have mercy on those who foolhardily grabbed at power, because such people always quickly joined his kingdom. Naruto had explained a few drawbacks that unlocking her Selkie blood would have, and she wanted to know more before she made up her mind. "Can you explain a few things to me, Naruto? What does being under Asgard's jurisdiction entail? What would it mean for me and Percy? Furthermore, would I still need to be surrounded by salt water at times to stay healthy even if I did not become a full Selkie?" Naruto signed and said, "I don't know anything further on the Selkie issue. My training in regard to the North's mystical life is more heavily focused on the monsters that live in the North and how to defeat them. During the school months I live in Alaska, so I'm in an area where both the North and the West both hold power. Like your son, I also have some blood ties to the North as well as the West, which is why I know they exist. Now when it comes to Asgard's jurisdiction, I know a good deal more about it. Being under the North's rule, you would be required to follow any edicts that the king of Asgard, which are rather few, besides having to obey mortal laws when interacting with mortals. As a Selkie hybrid, you would be expected to obey any rulings concerning the MacLeod clan that its clan leader made. That shouldn't be too hard, since your clan has unfortunately been decimated and scattered because of the wars that have occurred over this past century. It should go without saying, but as a sea spirit you would be under the rule of the Norse sea god Njord. From what I've been told by those in the know, is that Njord is a good and just ruler similar to the Earthshaker in temperament if a touch sterner. Sally was silent for a few moments, and then she sighed. Do I have to make my decision now, or can I wait and do some further thinking on my choice? Without thinking about it, Naruto pulled out one of his Hiraition knives and handed it to Sally. Take as much time as you need to think about this, Ms. Jackson. It is your life we're talking about here. Once you've made up your mind, you just need to throw that knife, and I'll be able to appear to hear your answer. Oh, before I leave to take out the trash, let me write down a few books that have reasonably accurate accounts of the Aesir, so you can know more about what you're getting into. Annabeth looked at the newest member of Camp Half-Blood and wondered what was so special about him. First, Chiron left for several months to follow up a special lead that a satyr had found. Then he, Grover, and the new kid show up in the middle of the day after escaping from a dragon attack. And then, to make matters even harder for Annabeth to wrap her mind around, Chiron had needed to call Naruto for help because the dragon that attacked them was one that Chiron had never even heard of before. How could one slightly lanky 12-year half-blood cause so much trouble? Once Chiron finished introducing the two half-bloods, he left to tackle the mountains of paperwork that were no doubt waiting for him in his office. Annabeth then nodded her head towards the door and said, "Follow me, Percy." Percy nodded his head and quickly followed Annabeth. After he gave a second glance to the door Grover had been escorted out of by a rather annoyed-looking older satyr who had been holding a baseball bat. The look on the elder satyr's face suggested that he wanted to use Grover in a game of t-ball with Grover's head as the ball. The duo very quickly walked out of the big house and over a small hill. Annabeth stopped and turned to look at Percy, so that she could see the look on his face when he first saw the cabins. As the longest-staying half-blood currently living at camp, Chiron had often asked her to show the new half-bloods around. She had quickly found that one of the perks to this was seeing the look on the newbies' faces when they first saw the cabins. Just as always happened with a new camper, Percy's eyes lit up with amazement and a touch of wonder as he looked at the cabins. Annabeth then became to lecture Percy on what he was seeing. There are 12 cabins in Camp Half-Blood, Percy, one for each of the 12 Olympians. The claimed children of each god or goddess on the council stay at the cabin dedicated to their divine parent. Most of the children of the gods and goddesses not on the Olympian Council, along with half-bloods of currently uncertain lineage, stay at Cabin 11 under Lord Hermes' protection, as he is the patron of travelers. That's why he is the second most respected and loved Olympian here at camp. Percy's mind latched onto two things in Annabeth's speech that confused and worried him. He's number 2? Then who is number 1? And you said most children of other gods stay at his cabins. What happens to the rest of the children of other gods? Despite her best efforts, a small smirk appeared on Annabeth's face. Spending so much time around Naruto and his clones had given her a slightly mischievous side. It was fun watching the newbie squirm for a second. Annabeth then ended her fun and explained, the half-bloods of gods and goddesses who are not on the council and who do not stay at Cabin 11 are the children of deities who have very close ties to one of the 12 Olympians. Because of those close ties, the Olympian in question lets those half-bloods stay in their cabin as a favor to their parent and Lord Hermes. There was a son of Lord Asclepius in camp during my first year here who stayed at Cabin 7, since Lord Apollo is Asclepius's father and both of them are gods of healing. That half-blood is currently in college studying to become a doctor. However, there are currently no half-blood children of the non-council member deities currently staying at an Olympian's cabin besides Cabin 11. Thankfully for Annabeth's pride, Percy did not notice her slight slip of the tongue. Both Naruto and his mother had started insisting that campers use the term non-council member god instead of minor god. Apparently, the other gods and goddesses found the term non-council member to be less insulting than the term minor. They didn't get any new privileges or powers, but most of them did seem happier having that label. Hera was promoting the use of the term to ease some of the long-standing tensions on Olympus. She might be pissed as all Tartarus that Amphitrite would not swear a binding oath to prove her innocence, even though the recovered evidence strongly implicated her in the diadem's theft. Unlike Zeus though, Hera wasn't about to let her personal rage get in the way of doing her duties as the ruler of Olympus. Annabeth pointed to Cabin 2 and said, "Lady Hera is currently the most respected and loved Olympian in the opinion of campers. You might not expect that given the stories about the Olympians that mortals know. But those stories are thousands of years old, and the ones dealing with her interacting with past half-bloods almost always involve her dealing with her husband's half-bloods. Lady Hera admitted on one of her visits to Camp Half-Blood that her husband's half-bloods are the only ones she cannot stand since their existence is a personal insult against her in addition to being a major offense against the dignity of her domain." There was a small pause as Annabeth waited for Percy to absorb what she said. It had been relatively easy for Hera to warm up to the members of Cabin 6. Since Athena was a single goddess, her children were only illegitimate as opposed to other cabins who were both illegitimate and the results of affairs. Aphrodite's and Dionysus's kids took the longest for Hera to warm up to since they were results of affairs and didn't have the grandchild factor to neutralize that annoyance for her. Even then Hera had been a lot friendlier to those campers at first than Dionysus ever was to a camper. Percy was surprised to hear that Hera was so popular at Camp Half-Blood. However, all of the surprises he and dealt with today resulted in the surprise not really impacting him much. By this point all Percy wanted to do was find a place to sit down and try to make sense of everything he had learned today. At least Annabeth seemed to be a friendly person to help him sort all of this out. Naruto worked his way through the Sky and Rage dance, so that he could reflect on everything that had happened since he rescued Chiron and Percy several weeks ago. SK had declared that Naruto had mastered the Sky and Rage dance for sage training purposes, and had already taught him a few more dances. However, Naruto had found that this dance was a good way for him to relax, and let his mind wander whenever he needed to think about things. Meditation had always been hard for Naruto back in the elemental nations, because he was always a very active person. It had taken him years to learn how to meditate to a point most people could reach in a few weeks or months. Thankfully for Naruto, his preparation to be a sage on Earth had given him access to a form of meditation that was more suited to him. Sally Jackson had accepted her great-grandfather's pelt after almost 2 weeks of deliberation on the matter. The now 3/4 Selkie had also moved to the same town Naruto was living in. Because Sally Jackson was now under Asgard's jurisdiction, she had been advised before her transformation to move closer to the North's territories. Since she wasn't a pure Selkie, she didn't have to live solely in the North's zones of influence. However, it wasn't advisable for her to remain in New York City or any area most Olympians focused their attention towards. If the wrong Olympian discovered that there were other pantheons in the world without being properly prepared, things would go to Tartarus no matter what. Thankfully, that little life insurance policy Naruto had been able to get retroactively attached to Gabe with a little help from his mother had made it easy for her to move. The supernatural elements of the town had also been very helpful in getting Sally settled in. Rossweiss was perhaps the most helpful as she had taken over training Sally in the arts she needed to know in order to thrive as a citizen of Asgard. Naruto didn't know that as he was closer to Issei as a friend that Rossweiss. Naruto had also given Sally her great-grandfather's claymore, since it was rightfully hers, and she would need a weapon to help protect herself. The claymore was currently hanging over the fireplace at the new Jackson house, because Sally wasn't physically suited to wielding the massive weapon. Instead, Sally was using a plain cold iron Katzbulger that had apparently been sent from Njord's armory less than a week after Rossweiss had deemed the claymore a poor match for Sally's abilities. Very quickly, Naruto's thoughts drifted to his newest student at Camp Half-Blood, Percy Jackson. There was something very different about that boy, but Naruto couldn't figure out what it was. First off, the boy's chakra reserves were unnaturally large for a boy his age. Until a shinobi reached their mid to late teens, one could predict how much chakra they would have at their disposal within a reasonable amount of accuracy. Lineage and training resulted in a fair amount of variation, but the standard range was a biological fact for preteens and young teens due to the fact that their bodies still had a lot of maturing to do. Having a divine lineage did not change this fact at all. Every other half-blood Naruto and his clones were training followed this biological rule. Naruto had massive chakra reserves twice the size Akage was expected to have at that age the first time around because he had been connected to the Kyuubi almost since birth. So what was Percy's excuse for having chakra reserves that would give any elite jonin back in Konoha a run for his or her money? Inexplicably large chakra reserves were the only thing that was well odd, for lack of a better word, about Percy that Naruto had noticed. Percy was picking up on the ninshu lessons that Naruto's clones were holding at camp too quickly. Sometimes Percy was at the head of the class for people in his skill group. That was a bit odd since the preteen tended to be in the middle of the pack in all his other studies, even when his peers were fellow half-bloods. However, Naruto knew that Percy's progress in his class wasn't just because the boy was naturally gifted in ninshu. Naruto had witnessed several geniuses, as they were called, back in Konoha, and he knew that Percy was not among their number. His progress was all wrong for that label even when he was just at the head of the class. Then there were the times when Percy made leaps of progress or understanding that just were not possible unless someone else was teaching Percy. That was not happening, and Naruto knew from talking with Percy that the boy wasn't sneaking a look at the more advanced group's lessons. In addition to what Naruto had witnessed via his clones, Chiron had also confided to Naruto something else that was puzzling about Percy. The traditional weaponry and unarmed combat lessons had been going terribly for Percy. Normally, a relatively sheltered half-blood was expected to have some problems with these lessons at first because they are naturally inexperienced in these matters. Percy's problem was that he was instinctively trying to fight using a very different style. Chiron noticed that the boy instinctively trying to use a style closer to what Naruto used than the other half-bloods, and given him a beginner's guide to Kenpo book. Surprisingly, Percy was taking to Kenpo like a fish to water. If it had been a Northern European style of combat, Naruto would have understood given Percy's Selkie blood, but why by Tartarus did Percy have the instincts for an East Asian style of combat? This train of thought was abruptly cut off by Naruto, as he sensed SK running towards him with an aura of worry that had a touch of genuine fear mixed in it. Naruto immediately stopped his meditative kata and turned towards the woods that his mentor soon came running out of. SK stopped a few feet from Naruto and said, "Thank the Great Spirit you're here, Naruto. We've got a massive problem on our hands. Earlier today I got a message from Sun Wukong, who's my contact with the Eastern Pantheon. You'd like him as he's a joker that's very protective of those he considers precious to him. In fact, you remind me of him quite a lot, which is probably why I put up you and your stupidity when it comes to certain goddesses." SK got a hard glare from Naruto along with a fairly respectable amount of killing intent. The coyote spirit's perverted remarks about Naruto's two goddess friends, one of whom he had privately agreed to marry, was really getting on his nerves. SK sighed and quickly apologized. "Sorry, Naruto. I was just trying to lighten the atmosphere because Wukong's message is extremely alarming. The Yada no Kagami, the real one and not the fake one the Japanese made to replace it when the Eastern Pantheon decided to put it under their direct protection in 1040, is missing. Furthermore, the Eastern Pantheon has detected that it has been moved to somewhere outside of the East's control. Something is masking the movement of the Yada no Kagami. The regents have also just learned that the Yada no Kagami will be showing up somewhere in the United States sometime over the summer. Its foreign nature and the masking effects it's under make it impossible for even the fates to see more clearly precisely where and when it will show up." The coyote spirit sat down and started to shiver slightly from fear. He looked straight into the slightly confused and worried eyes of his student and started to explain things. The Eastern Pantheon, specifically the Kami subsection, has a special set of magical items known as Shinjukyo, or deity and beast mirrors in English. The most basic of these mirrors allow one to see through any illusion. More powerful versions can dispel any illusion or falsehood that is within their reflection. However, the Yada no Kagami is the most powerful of these Shinjukyo in existence, and can bring any truth no matter how small, obscure, or hidden to the surface, in addition to the other powers of a Shinjukyo. Naruto thought for a moment and then he realized what had SK so worried: the Latin protocols. "You're afraid that the Yada no Kagami will reveal the truth about the Latin protocols?" Sklepp nodded his head and said, "Reveal and probably destroy them." The Latin protocols are after all a forced falsehood on the Baal echoes of a very fundamental sort, who and what they are. The chance that the Yata no Kagami bringing the Baal echoes up the surface becomes even more likely when you consider how certain practices that strengthen the Baal echoes has crept into Western society over the past century. The Council of Regents was rather annoyed with many mortals over the attacks on traditional morality and values. Those values had been chosen as the bedrock of Western civilization because they provided morals that are aligned with the basic rules set down by Attic Yaman to the four kings about how humans and gods were to behave. They were also refined during the Hellenistic age to be better suppressants on the Baal echoes kept locked away by the Latin protocols. A frown appeared on Naruto's face and he asked, "How can we deal with this Yata no Kagami? I'm assuming that since I'm the only half-blood from the West to my knowledge that knows about the Council of Regents that I'm going to have to deal with this item." Sklepp sighed and answered his pupil. "First we need to know when and where that Yata no Kagami enters the West. Most likely we'll contact your mother through the fates to issue a special quest to have you search for the mirror. That is going to be fun as things are looking like your mother's diadem situation will have to be solved by a quest as well. Some members of the council are also trying to find out if whoever is behind the theft of the Yata no Kagami has any connection to the diadem's theft. Taking such a valuable artifact from its secured vault and transporting it in secrecy halfway across the world speaks of someone with a plan. The question we're trying to answer is whether this intellect is also behind the theft of your mother's diadem, just planning on taking advantage of the already present situation, or has no knowledge of the diadem's status whatsoever." Naruto's eyes narrowed as he thought about the points Sklepp had voiced. Jiraiya had long ago taught Naruto that learning a person or group's motives for doing something was critical in the intelligence world. If you knew what some had done, what they wanted to accomplish, and what was driving them, you could get a fairly accurate estimation of their future actions. Naruto quickly thought about the scenarios Sklepp suggested, and a few more scenarios that he could see, like the possibility that both thefts were committed by two separate groups being encouraged by a fifth unknown group. In all honesty, Naruto wasn't sure which possible scenario worried him the least. But no matter who was behind these actions, Naruto was determined to put a halt to their plans. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.